Episode 1. The Storm That Separated. The wind howled through the trees like a wild, unchained beast, its shrill cry piercing the dense silence of the night. Dark clouds swirled above, casting a heavy, suffocating shadow over the small town of Hollow Creek. The storm had come without warning. Thick sheets of rain, lightning that split the sky into jagged scars, and a thunder that rumbled as though the heavens themselves were shaking with fury. Inside the local diner, the few remaining souls huddled together, waiting for the storm to pass. The place smelled of stale coffee and old leather, the flickering fluorescent lights above casting an eerie glow on the patrons who sat in tense silence. Their faces were drawn, eyes darting nervously toward the windows, as if expecting something more than just a storm to arrive. But it wasn't the storm that had made the air so heavy, so thick with foreboding. It was something else, something far darker. "Did you hear that?" whispered Karen, a waitress who had worked at the diner for as long as anyone could remember. Her voice trembled slightly, though she tried to disguise it behind a forced bravado. "What?" asked Tom, a regular who sat in the corner booth, his hands wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee. His eyes were tired, worn from too many sleepless nights, but there was an edge of unease in his voice, too. "The wind," she said, lowering her voice. It sounded different, like it was saying something. Tom chuckled dryly. "It's just a storm, Karen. You're hearing things." But Karen wasn't convinced. She had been working the night shift long enough to know when something felt wrong. And tonight, everything felt wrong. The way the wind howled, the way the lightning flashed, everything about this storm was off. A flash of light broke through the darkened diner as the power went out, plunging the room into darkness. A collective gasp rose from the patrons, and the sound of rattling dishes filled the air. "What the hell's going on?" someone muttered from the back. "I'll check the fuse box," Tom said, standing up and fumbling for his keys in the dark. But before he could move, a loud crash echoed from outside, followed by a strange, unnerving silence. The patrons froze. No one moved. No one breathed. It was then that the door to the diner slammed open with a deafening bang. The wind roared inside, swirling in like an uninvited guest. A figure stood in the doorway, drenched to the bone, their silhouette barely visible in the storm's fury. "Who the hell are you?" Karen demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and authority. The figure didn't answer at first. They stood motionless in the doorway, as if listening to something, their heads slightly tilted, eyes wide, as though they were hearing something no one else could hear. "Help, please. You have to help." The words were barely a whisper, but they were enough to send a chill down Karen's spine. The figure stepped forward, and as the storm howled louder outside, the lights flickered back on. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, Karen saw the face of the stranger, a gaunt, pale face, eyes wide and unblinking, as though they had seen something far worse than the storm. Their skin was pale, as if drained of life itself, and their clothes were tattered, as though they had been walking through the storm for days. "Who are you?" Karen repeated, her voice trembling. I don't know," the stranger said, their voice shaky and broken. I was somewhere else. And then the storm came, and I couldn't leave. I couldn't move." "What happened to you?" Tom asked, his voice sharp, eyes scanning the stranger's wild eye for some sign of reason. I was in another place, a place behind the veil, and now I can't find my way back. Please, I need help." Karen stepped back instinctively, her hand reaching for the counter for support. "Behind the veil? What are you talking about? Who are you?" The stranger's eyes widened further, and for a moment, they seemed to look right through her, as though they weren't even seeing her at all. "The veil," they murmured, as if the words held some weight, some terrible truth. "The veil between worlds. It's been torn, and it's coming for us all." Before anyone could ask another question, the stranger collapsed, their body crumpling to the floor with a sickening thud. The storm outside roared louder, as if in response, shaking the very walls of the diner. Episode 2, whispers in the walls. The diner had become a place of uneasy silence, the air thick with questions that hung in the corners like the dust motes floating in the weak light. The storm outside raged as fiercely as it had before, but now the town of Hollow Creek seemed to be caught in its grip. Not just a wind, but something darker, something that had followed them into the diner. Karen stood behind the counter, her hands gripping the worn wood, eyes fixed on the motionless figure of the stranger who had collapsed on the floor. The patrons, still frozen, murmured quietly amongst themselves, but no one dared approach. The only sound in the room was the constant patter of rain against the windows and the occasional rattle of the diner's sign as it swayed in the wind. Tom was the first to break the silence. He stepped forward, kneeling beside the stranger, his brow furrowed with concern. She's alive," Tom muttered, looking over the figure with suspicion, but also a tinge of concern. Her chest rose and fell slowly, as if every breath was a battle against the weight of the storm. Karen hesitated. "Who is she? What is she talking about? Behind the veil? What the hell does that mean?" "I don't know," Tom replied, his voice heavy with the unease that was spreading through his bones. "But she's saying something about the veil and those Hollow Watchers." Karen shivered. The words felt wrong, foreign, but somehow they resonated within her, a chilling reminder of things better left unknown. The storm outside howled again, shaking the windows, and in that moment, the power flickered again. The lights dimmed, and for a split second, everything went black. When the lights came back on, the atmosphere was different. The diner felt colder, heavier, like the weight of the storm had crept into the very bones of the building. And then there was a sound, a faint, eerie whisper. It was so quiet at first that Karen thought she might have imagined it. But then it came again, louder, more distinct, like a voice or a dozen voices calling them from the walls. Karen's heart skipped a beat. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the faces of the patrons. No one else seemed to hear it, but the air felt charged, as though the very walls were listening. "Did anyone else hear that?" she asked, her voice a whisper herself. No one answered. The others just stared, their faces pale, their expressions uncertain. Tom stood up, his hand still on the stranger's shoulder, and shook his head. "It's just the storm. Wind playing tricks, Karen." But Karen wasn't convinced. There was something about the whisper that gnawed at her. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't natural. She moved cautiously to the wall closest to her, pressing her ear against it, straining to listen. The voice wasn't clear, but it was there, hidden beneath the layers of wind and rain, a voice faintly familiar, as if it was calling her name. "Karen." The voice was soft, almost gentle, but unmistakably hers. She pulled away from the wall, her heart racing, her skin crawling with the cold fingers of fear. "Who's there?" she called out into the silence. No answer, only the low hum of the storm. Tom, noticing her fear, stepped up behind her. "Karen, it's just the storm. It's messing with our heads." But deep down, Karen knew. She knew that this was more than just a storm. Something was wrong. The stranger's words echoed in her mind. The veil between worlds, the Hollow Watchers, and they made sense now in a way that terrified her. "I'm going to check the back," Karen said suddenly, her voice tight. She needed to get away, needed to escape the weight of the voices that pressed in around her. She turned and headed for the diner's back door, not waiting for Tom's reply. The back hallway of the diner was dimly lit, the air cool and musty. It smelled faintly of old grease and the mildew of forgotten corners. Karen moved quickly, her footsteps echoing softly in the narrow passage. She pushed open the door to the storage room, expecting to find something, a fuse box, a broken pipe, anything, but instead, she found nothing but the whisper. It was louder now, surrounding her, filling the room. The walls seemed to hum, vibrating with the strange, otherworldly sound. It was as if the very air was alive with it. She turned, trying to find the source, but there was no one in the room, just the hum. And then the sound grew clearer. The voice was no longer just a whisper. It was speaking to her, directly to her. "You're here now, Karen. You've crossed the line." Her breath hitched in her throat. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice shaking with the terror she tried to suppress. The voice responded, a chilling laugh following its words. "You've come to see the truth. You cannot go back." Karen felt the walls close in around her, the space suddenly too small, too oppressive. She spun toward the door, but it was already closed, slammed shut. The whispering voices seemed to echo from every corner, pressing against her mind. "The veil is thin, Karen," the voice continued, its tone growing darker. "And the watchers are watching. They always have been." She staggered backward, her hands scrambling for purchase on the shelves. "What do you want from me? What do you want?" The voice only chuckled again, a low, rumbling sound. "We've waited for you, Karen. You are the key. The door is open and it's time to cross." Suddenly, everything went still. The whispering ceased and the room fell into an unnatural silence. Karen's breath was ragged, her body trembling as she stood frozen in the middle of the room. And then she heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping from behind her, growing louder, closer. A shadow crossed the far corner of the room. The veil between Episode 3, the eyes behind the glass. The storm had been relentless. Its fury only intensified as the hours dragged on. Inside Hollow Creek's diner, the air felt stagnant, thick with tension, even though the lights had come back on. There was an unsettling atmosphere in the room that no amount of flashing neon signs could dispel. The wind outside howled like a living thing, its cries seeping through the cracks of the old windows, vibrating the very walls of the building. Karen sat at the counter, her mind reeling from what had happened earlier. The whispering voices had called her name, the presence of the walls. They had all felt too real, too close. She rubbed her temples, trying to push away the images that lingered, but they wouldn't leave her. And then there were the words of the stranger. "The veil is thin, Karen, and the watchers are watching." What did it all mean? And why her? A faint tap on the counter startled her, and she looked up to see Tom standing across from her, his eyes fixed on her with an unreadable expression. "Karen, we need to talk," he said, his voice low, almost urgent. "What is it, Tom?" she asked, trying to steady her breath. She felt like the walls themselves were closing in, but she couldn't tell if it was her mind playing tricks on her or if something more sinister was truly at work. "We found something," he said, his eyes flickering to the far corner of the diner. "In the back. Something strange." Karen raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" Tom gestured for her to follow him. Without a word, she stood and walked with him to the back of the diner. The door to the storage room creaked open, and a familiar smell of old boxes and grease filled the air. But this time, the room felt colder, the shadows darker than they had ever been before. Karen's heart began to race as she followed Tom toward the corner of the room, where an old, dusty mirror hung on the wall. She hadn't noticed it before, but now, under the dim light, it stood out, a massive, cracked mirror with tarnished edges. "What's this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Tom didn't answer. He merely stepped closer to the mirror, his eyes narrowing. "We found this back here, hidden behind some old crates. It wasn't here before. At least, not like this." Karen approached cautiously, her breath hitching as she gazed into the reflection. At first, it was just her, Tom, and the empty room behind them. But then, slowly, something changed. The glass seemed to distort, rippling like water, as though something was moving just beyond the surface. For a split second, Karen thought she saw a figure, someone standing behind them, a pale, gaunt face with hollow eyes, staring back at her. Her heart skipped a beat. She blinked, and the figure was gone. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Tom turned his gaze to the mirror, but all he saw was their own reflection. "There's nothing there, Karen," he said, his tone defensive, though there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Karen took a step closer, unwilling to turn away. "I swear I saw something. It was there, right behind us." Tom sighed, rubbing his face. "Maybe you're just tired. You've been through a lot tonight. We all have." But Karen wasn't convinced. Something about this mirror, about what she had seen, or thought she'd seen, felt wrong, like it wasn't just a reflection. It was as if the mirror was trying to show her something it didn't want her to see. She reached out to touch the glass, and the moment her fingers brushed the surface, a cold shock ran through her, as if she had touched ice. The mirror rippled again And this time, the reflection didn't just show her face. It showed something else. A dark hallway. The air was thick with shadow, and at the end of the hallway stood a figure. Its features obscured in darkness. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Karen's breath caught in her throat, and she stumbled back, pulling her hand away from a mirror. The reflection snapped back to normal, showing only the empty room once again. "What the hell?" she whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. Tom was at her side now, his expression unreadable. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than before. "I saw something," Karen said, her voice shaky. "There was someone in the mirror. I saw it." Tom's eyes darkened as he glanced at the mirror, but he didn't seem convinced. "Karen, you gotta snap out of it. There's nothing here, just a mirror." But Karen wasn't so sure. The feeling that had settled deep in her chest, the coldness of the glass, the way it had rippled when she touched it, it was all wrong. And the figure, those glowing eyes, they were etched into her mind now, refusing to fade. "I'm not crazy, Tom," she said more forcefully this time. "Something is here, something in the mirror, and I don't think it's just some reflection." Tom looked at her for a long moment before finally nodding. "All right, we'll get some answers, but we have to stick together. Whatever's going on, we're not alone." But as he turned to leave the room, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that they were far from alone. The mirror, the glass, had shown them something that she knew wasn't just a figment of her imagination. It was real. As the hours ticked by, Karen couldn't seem to shake the feeling that the mirror was still watching her. It was like the very air around her had thickened, the shadows stretching longer, as if the darkness itself was conspiring against her. She tried to distract herself, helping Tom clean up and closing the diner for the night, but her mind kept wandering back to the mirror, to the figure in the hallway. It wasn't until much later, when the last patron had left and the storm began to die down, that Karen found herself standing in front of the mirror once more. The room was quiet, too quiet. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears as she stared into the glass. And then, just as before, the surface rippled. But this time, it wasn't a hallway she saw. It was something far worse. A dark figure with eyes that burned with an unnatural fire. Its face was hidden, but its hands, clawed, twisted, reached out toward her, beckoning her into the darkness. Episode 4. The Shadow on the Hill. The town of Hollow Creek had always been shrouded in mystery, but tonight, the air felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the very land itself was holding its breath. The storm had passed, leaving behind a lingering sense of dread. The wind had died down, and the only sound was a distant drip of rainwater off rooftops. But something else lurked beneath the quiet. Something ancient, something waiting. Karen stood by the diner's window, her eyes cast out into the distance. The town lay still beneath the heavy, dark sky, every shadow seeming to twist in unnatural ways. But there, beyond the town's edge, the silhouette of the hill loomed, and on that hill, she knew something was watching. Tom had tried to convince her it was nothing, a trick of the mind, a figment of her imagination. But Karen couldn't shake the feeling. She had to go. She had to know what it was. "The storm's gone," she whispered to herself, turning away from the window. But the real terror is just beginning. It had been days since the stranger had arrived at the diner, days since the first whisper had rattled her. Every night since then, Karen's dreams had been filled with visions of that strange figure in the mirror, the tall, dark silhouette standing just beyond the edges of the glass. The figure's eyes burned like fire, staring back at her, pulling her closer with every glance. The whispers, too, had grown louder in her mind, calling her name as if from some far-off place. But it wasn't until the night she found herself staring at the hill that she truly understood. She wasn't just haunted by the past. She was being dragged toward something far worse. "Tom, we need to go up there," she said, her voice tight as she approached him in the back of the diner. Tom looked up from where he had been cleaning a glass. "Up there? You're out of your mind. It's just a hill." "I don't think so," Karen replied, her voice low but firm. "There's something on that hill, Tom. Something waiting. Karen, we've been through a lot. This whole town, this storm, It's messing with our heads." "It's not just a storm," Karen said, her eyes narrowing. "We've seen things, heard things, and it's connected to that hill. I can feel it." Tom sighed, rubbing his eyes. He had never been one for supernatural explanations, but the events of the past few days had started to erode his skepticism. "All right," he said reluctantly. "I'll go with you. But if we're not back in an hour, I'm leaving without you." Karen gave him a quick nod, her heart racing. They both grabbed their jackets and walked out of the diner. The air outside still heavy with the aftertaste of the storm. The moon was barely visible behind the thick clouds, casting everything in an eerie, silver-gray light. They made their way down the main street, past the abandoned shops and houses that lined Hollow Creek, until they reached the foot of the hill. The incline was steep, and the ground was slick with remnants of the rain. Every step they took seemed to echo, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. As they climbed, Karen's mind raced. She had to know the truth. Whatever waited on that hill had been calling her for days, and now she would answer. It didn't take long before the trees at the base of the hill began to thin, and the ground leveled out. At the top, there was an ancient stone structure, half crumbled and overtaken by vines. It was a place she had never noticed before, despite living in Hollow Creek her whole life. The stones were covered in moss, and the air around it felt colder, thicker. Tom stopped a few feet away, looking uneasy. "This is it?" he asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and caution. Karen stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. This is where it started. This is where everything connects. As she approached the structure, her eyes were drawn to something etched into the stone, a symbol barely visible through the overgrowth. It was an intricate design, something ancient, and something about it felt wrong. The symbol seemed to hum with an energy that prickled at her skin. "Karen!" Tom's voice trembled behind her. "We need to leave." But Karen didn't listen. She reached out and brushed away the vines, exposing the full symbol. Her breath caught in her throat as the mark seemed to pulse beneath her fingertips. And then the ground beneath them shifted. A low rumble echoed through the earth, vibrating in their bones. The air grew thick, heavy with the weight of something unseen, something ancient. A shadow, darker than the night, seemed to see from the stones, crawling up the hill like a living thing. It stretched across the ground toward them, reaching, hungry. Tom stepped back, his face pale. "What the hell is that?" Karen couldn't answer. She was frozen, staring at the shadow as it inched closer. She had seen this before. In her dreams, in the mirror, the same figure, the same presence. And then, a voice broke through the silence. A low, guttural voice that seemed to come from the very air around them. "You are too late." The words were not spoken, but felt deep in their bones, in their very souls. The shadow stretched forward, reaching toward them like a claw. "No!" Karen whispered, taking a step back. But it was too late. The ground beneath their feet cracked open, and the shadow surged forward, engulfing them. Everything went black. Episode 5, The Silent City. The oppressive silence of the hills still clung to Karen as she stumbled backward, away from the stone structure, away from the darkness that had tried to consume them both. The shadow had been so close, so tangible, that she could feel its cold breath on her skin as it reached for her, its presence like the suffocating grip of a nightmare. But now, the hill had returned to stillness, as if nothing had happened, except that something had happened. They had crossed a line, stepped into a place where the rules of the world no longer applied, where the boundary between life and death, light and shadow, had dissolved. Karen wiped the cold sweat from her brow, her body shaking with adrenaline. She could still feel the lingering touch of the shadow on her soul, a weight that wouldn't lift. Tom was beside her now, looking just as shaken, his face pale and eyes wide with disbelief. "What the hell just happened?" Tom whispered, his voice raw with fear. That thing." "I don't know," Karen replied, her voice trembling. She could feel the air around them shifting, thick with something dark and unfathomable. She could still hear the faint echo of the voice that had spoken to them. "You are too late." It echoed in her mind, over and over. Tom grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "We need to get back to town." Whatever that was, it's not over. It's just the beginning. Karen nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She couldn't explain it. This heavy, suffocating feeling that weighed her down, that told her the worst was still ahead. But she knew Tom was right. They couldn't stay here, not in the presence of whatever was pulling at the fabric of reality itself. They turned to leave, but as they made their way down the hill, Karen noticed something that stopped her in her tracks. Far in the distance, just past the tree line, a faint glow pulsed in the heart of Hollow Creek. It wasn't the usual flickering of streetlights or the faint glow of the diner sign. It was something darker, something unnatural, and it was growing. "I don't like this," Karen muttered, her heart hammering in her chest. Tom followed her gaze and cursed under his breath. "What the hell is that?" They made their way back to town, but the closer they got to the source of the light, the more it felt as though the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Every step they took seemed heavier, as if the very ground was trying to pull them back. As they reached the outskirts of Hollow Creek, Karen felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The town was eerily silent. The usual hum of life, the sound of passing cars, children playing, distant voices, was absent. The streets were empty, not a soul in sight. It was as if the entire town had been swallowed by the void. "This isn't right," Karen said, her voice tight with growing dread. "Where is everyone?" Tom's voice was low, almost fearful. Maybe they've all left, or something happened to them. But Karen wasn't convinced. She had a sinking feeling in her stomach that something far worse had happened to the people of Hollow Creek. They moved quickly down the main street, heading toward the center of town. The glow from the distant light grew brighter with each step, and as they turned the corner, they finally saw it. An abandoned building at the heart of Hollow Creek, one that Karen had never seen before. It was an old, decaying structure, its windows shattered and boarded up. But the glow came from inside, pulsing with an unnatural light that seemed to hum with energy. "Is that?" Tom started, but his words trailed off as Karen stepped closer to the building, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. "Karen, wait!" Tom hissed, grabbing her arm, but she shook him off. She had to know. Whatever was inside that building, it was connected to everything that had been happening in Hollow Creek, to the storm, to the whispers, to the shadow on the hill. As Karen approached the building, she noticed a symbol. The same one she had seen etched into the stones at the top of the hill was carved into the crumbling wall near the entrance. It was faint but unmistakable. She ran her fingers over the cool stone, feeling a shiver of recognition crawl up her spine. The door to the building was partially ajar. She pushed it open, stepping inside. The air was thick, stagnant, and the light inside was brighter than it had seemed from outside. The room was vast, filled with ancient relics, books, artifacts, strange objects that seemed to hum with an energy she couldn't explain. But it wasn't the objects that caught her attention. It was the figure standing in the center of the room. It was tall, impossibly tall, draped in shadows that clung to its form like a shroud. The figure's face was obscured, but Karen could feel its presence, could sense its gaze, even though its eyes were hidden. And then it spoke. "You have come far, Karen." Her breath caught in her throat, and she took an instinctive step back. Who are you?" "I am the Watcher," the figure said, its voice low and resonant, echoing in the vastness of the room. "I have waited for you, for this moment." Tom stepped forward, his voice shaking with fear. This isn't real. This is a trick, right?" The Watcher's presence seemed to swell, pressing it on them both. "No trick, mortal. This is no illusion. The veil has been torn, and you are here because you belong here, just as you are meant to be." Karen felt her heart race. "What do you want from us? What is this place?" "This place," the Watcher replied, "is the boundary between worlds, the barrier that has kept the darkness at bay. But that barrier is weakening, and when it falls completely, there will be no place left for the living. You must understand, Karen, this town, this world, it is all connected, and you are the key." "The key?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "The key to what?" The Watcher tilted its head, a sound like a sigh coming from deep within its being. "The key to opening the gate. The key to the end." Episode 6, The Forgotten Ones. The town of Hollow Creek was as silent as a graveyard, the kind of silence that wraps itself around your bones and refuses to let go. It had been days since Karen and Tom had ventured up to the hill, days since the Watcher had revealed the truth to them. And yet, the weight of that moment, the knowledge that they were caught between two worlds, hung heavily on their shoulders, pushing them down with an invisible force. Karen couldn't shake the feeling that the town was holding its breath, waiting for something to break, something to give, and she couldn't get the image of the Watcher's dark, shifting form out of her mind. Its voice echoed in her ears, even when she tried to shut it out. "You are the key." She tried to sleep, but the nightmares came every time she closed her eyes. The figure in the mirror, the shadow on the hill, and the never-ending whispers that seemed to beckon her toward the edge of the darkness. The nightmares were not just dreams. They were warnings. It was late afternoon when Karen and Tom decided to leave the diner and head back to the center of Hollow Creek. The streets were still empty, a ghost town caught in the throes of something far beyond natural comprehension. They had grown accustomed to the silence, but today it felt different. There was a heaviness to it that made every step feel deliberate, as if the town itself was watching them. "I can't shake this feeling," Karen muttered, glancing nervously around as they walked down the main street. "Something's wrong." Tom gave her a sidelong glance, his expression taut with anxiety. "We've been through a lot, Karen. Maybe we're just, I don't know, on edge." She shook her head, pushing a lock of hair from her face. "No, this isn't just on edge. This is something else. It's like the air itself is holding a secret." The faintest sound interrupted their conversation, the unmistakable creak of a door swinging open. Karen stopped dead in her tracks, her heart racing. She turned toward the sound, her eyes narrowing. A small, decrepit house stood at the edge of the street, its windows dark, its roof sagging under the weight of years. Karen didn't recognize the house. In fact, she was certain it hadn't been there before. It was as if it had materialized overnight, a structure that didn't belong in Hollow Creek. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice hoarse with unease. Tom followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing. "I don't know. I've never seen it before." Before Karen could respond, a soft, chilling voice came from behind them. "Don't go there." Both Karen and Tom spun around to find a woman standing just behind them. She was tall, pale, with dark, hollow eyes that seemed to have seen far too much. Her clothes were old-fashioned, as if she had stepped out of another time. Her expression was one of sorrow, but there was something unsettling about the sadness in her eyes. "Who are you?" Karen asked, her voice cautious but steady. The woman's lips parted, but it was as though the words didn't want to leave her mouth. She seemed to be struggling with something inside, something that was keeping her from speaking the truth. After a long pause, she finally spoke again, her voice soft but filled with urgency. "Don't go inside the house." The words were as clear as day, but the fear behind them made them feel like a warning. "It's not what you think. None of this is what you think." Karen felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean? What's inside?" The woman opened her mouth as if to speak, but suddenly, her gaze snapped toward the house. She stiffened, her body going rigid. "They're waiting," she murmured, her voice shaking. "You can't escape them. They will find you." Before Karen could ask any more questions, the woman spun around and disappeared into the shadows, leaving only the echoes of her word behind. "Who was that?" Tom asked, his voice thick with disbelief. Karen's mind raced, tried to make sense of what had just happened. But before she could reply, she felt a sudden pressure in her chest, as though something was pressing against her, trying to push her back. The house. It was calling to her. Karen found herself standing in front of the house, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of its presence, like an invisible force tugging at her, urging her to enter. The air around her seemed to warp, as if the house was pulling reality itself out of shape. Tom stood beside her, hesitant but unable to stop himself from looking at the door. "This feels wrong, Karen. We shouldn't go in there." "I know," Karen whispered, her voice trembling. "But I have to. I have to understand what's going on." With a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The moment they stepped inside, the temperature dropped. The floorboards creaked beneath their feet as if they, too, were reluctant to bear the weight of their intrusion. Dust hung in the air, swirling like ghosts in the dim light. The house was eerily quiet, its emptiness suffocating. But as they moved deeper into the hallway, Karen heard a faint sound, the unmistakable scrape of something dragging along the floor. Her heart skipped a beat. "What is that?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Karen's eyes scanned the room, but she could see nothing, just shadows. And then, from the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of movement. A shape, a fleeting shadow, moved past the doorway at the end of the hall. Without thinking, Karen rushed forward, pulling Tom behind her. They reached the end of the hallway and found a door half open, leading into what appeared to be a small, cluttered room. But as they stepped inside, they realized it wasn't a room at all. It was a tomb. The walls were lined with old, rotting bookshelves, their contents covered in layers of dust and decay. And in the center of the room, resting on a wooden pedestal, was a large, blackened mirror. Karen's breath caught in her throat. The mirror, she had seen it before. It was the same one from her dreams, the one she had seen in the shadows on the hill. But this time, the reflection was different. There was a figure in the mirror, tall, dark, and shrouded in shadow. But it wasn't just a reflection. It was moving. It was alive. Episode 7, The Breaking Point. The house stood silent behind them, its dark windows like empty eyes staring into the abyss. The door had slammed shut of its own accord, cutting off their escape from the nightmares lurking within. Tom's breathing was labored, his chest heaving with every inhaled breath as he backed away from the cursed mirror, his face pale with disbelief. Karen could feel the weight of the air pressing in on them, thick, suffocating. The temperature in the room had dropped sharply, and with it, the pulse of dread in her veins quickened. She glanced at Tom, whose face was a mask of horror, his eyes wide, still fixed on the mirror. "What is that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Karen couldn't answer. She couldn't tear her gaze away either. The figure in the mirror wasn't like before. It wasn't simply a reflection anymore. It was as if the mirror had become a window, and through it, they could see into another world, a place filled with shadows and whispers, with an eerie, unearthly glow. The figure moved, its form becoming clearer, more distinct. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its shape seemed to ripple like smoke. For a moment, Karen thought she saw its eyes, hollow, black pits that seemed to draw everything into them. It reached out, its long fingers extending toward them from the other side of the glass. Karen's pulse raced, her instincts screaming at her to turn and run. But her legs felt like they were rooted to the spot. She was paralyzed, caught in the gaze of a creature, or whatever it was, on the other side. "Karen!" Tom's voice broke through her panic, sounding distant and strained. "We need to go. We need to get out of here." But Karen didn't move. Something inside her knew they couldn't leave, not until they understood what was happening. The mirror was the key. She was sure of it. Every instinct told her that whatever the creature was, whatever the force behind this nightmare, it was tied to this place. "I'm not leaving until we figure this out," Karen said, her voice shaking but resolute. She turned her eyes back to the mirror. The figure was still there, its form twisting and bending, as though the very air around it was alive. It reached again, this time more quickly, its fingers like claws extending to the glass toward her. But instead of pulling away, Karen stepped closer. Tom grabbed her arm, his grip firm and panicked. "Karen, no, don't." But Karen was already too close to the mirror. She could feel its energy, its pull, wrapping around her like a chain. And in that moment, as she stood face to face with the thing in the glass, she felt a voice inside her mind, a whisper, soft yet commanding. "You are the key." Karen's heart skipped a beat, the words echoing in her thoughts as though they came from the very depths of the mirror. The creature's gaze shifted, and for the briefest of moments, it seemed to acknowledge her, its eyes narrowing as though it recognized her presence. The reflection began to warp again, bending like liquid. The shadows in the mirror grew darker, and the air in the room felt colder still. Tom's grip tightened. "We need to leave, Karen. This isn't real. It can't be real. We need to go." But Karen couldn't look away. Something was happening. The veil was thinning. The force on the other side of the mirror, the creature or whatever it was trying to come through, and Karen had a sinking feeling in her chest that she was the one who had to stop it. But how? The mirror surface shimmered once again, and this time there was no longer reflection. Instead, the glass began to crack, a thin spiderweb of fractures appearing across its surface. Karen stepped back, but her eyes were still locked on the shattered mirror. She could feel the pull in her chest, an almost magnetic force trying to drag her forward. The voice came again, but louder this time, reverberating in the very air around them. "The gate is open. Come through." Karen's stomach turned. "No, I can't," she whispered, her words heavy with the realization that the barrier between worlds was dissolving. The creature was calling her to step through, to cross the line between the living and the dead. Tom's voice was filled with terror as he yanked her away from the mirror. "Karen, this is wrong. This thing wants you. It's pulling you in." But Karen couldn't hear him anymore. The world around her was fading. The air was thick, suffocating, and the shadows seemed to twist and sway like dark ribbons. She could feel the weight of the Watcher's presence, the force that had been watching them from the beginning. It was here, and now it was inside her mind. Her heart raced as the mirror cracked further, the glass splintering like ice. She stumbled backward, but the pull grew stronger. Her vision blurred as darkness crept in at the edges of her mind. The world around her seemed to stretch, and she felt as if she were being torn in two. "Come through, Karen." The voice was louder now, but it was not just the voice of the creature. It was the voice of the Watcher, the voice that had haunted her dreams, the voice that had spoken to her on the hill. "The veil is yours to cross." The last thing Karen remembered was the feeling of the glass, the cold, sharp edge against her skin. Karen awoke with a jolt, gasping for air. Her surroundings were unfamiliar, the walls around her flickering like they were made of smoke. She pushed herself upright, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and blinked into the dimness. The room was dark, but not dark in the way she was used to. It was as though the light was being sucked away, fading into the blackness that surrounded her. Where was she? She stood, unsteady on her feet, and looked around. The room seemed endless, stretching into a space where the boundaries of reality had collapsed. Shadows moved across the walls like living things, creeping in the corners of her vision, always just out of reach. And then she heard it, a voice, soft but sharp, cutting through the quiet like a blade. "You've crossed over." Karen spun around, her heart racing, but there was no one there. No figure, no creature, just the ever-encroaching shadows, swirling in the depths of this strange place. She was no longer in the diner, no longer on the hill. She had crossed the veil, and now she was somewhere else entirely. Episode 8, The Unseen Hand. Karen's heartbeat echoed in her ears, a drumbeat of fear, as the world around her continued to shift and blur. The shadows moved like liquid, flowing across the walls in rhythmic patterns that seemed almost sentient. There was no longer any clear division between the light and the dark. They merged together, swirling like an endless maelstrom. Every corner of the space seemed to pulse with life of its own, the very air charged with static energy that made her skin crawl. She was trapped. Her vision swam, and she reached out instinctively, grabbing at nothing but cold, empty space. She had crossed into something far beyond the world she knew, a world where time had no meaning, where reality bent and twisted at the will of forces she could not comprehend. The Watcher's words rang in her mind, louder now, reverberating like a drumbeat deep in her chest. "You've crossed over, Karen. The veil is torn, and now you will see what has always been hidden." But where was Tom? She had been with him just moments ago, hadn't she? Hadn't they both been standing in the room with the mirror, trying to understand what was happening? But now, everything was different. The air was thick with a heaviness that pressed down on her lungs, and the darkness felt alive, like it was waiting for her to break. The sense of dread began to grow, intensifying like a pressure in her mind. The shadows in the room began to stretch, extending far beyond their natural boundaries. She blinked, and for a split second, she thought she saw a figure. Someone, emerging from the depths of the darkness. But when she turned, it was gone. The space had swallowed it whole. No, This can't be happening. The voice inside her head was louder now, more insistent. Something was pulling her, something that felt alive and ancient. She could feel it. It was watching her. It was everywhere. "Tom!" she shouted, her voice hoarse, but the sound was swallowed by the overwhelming quiet. There was no reply. She stepped forward, her legs unsteady, as if the ground itself was shifting beneath her feet. The shadows seemed to reach out toward her, curling around her ankles like fingers, urging her forward. But where? Where was she supposed to go? Everything was wrong here. The very air seemed to vibrate with a low hum that sent a chill down her spine, as though we're alive with ancient energy, ancient power. And then she heard it, the sound of breathing. It was soft at first, like a whisper, but it grew louder with each passing second, closer. She spun around, but saw nothing. No figure, no shape, just the endless, swirling shadows. The breathing came again, louder now, almost as if it were coming from right behind her. You could not escape. The voice was cold, guttural, and familiar, though Karen couldn't place it. She felt the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. The voice, though it lacked warmth, carried an undercurrent of authority, a dark presence that filled the space around her. She turned sharply, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. But nothing, only the endless darkness, pulsing with malevolent intent. The voice came again, this time not from behind her, but from within the very walls. "You're trapped, Karen. There is nowhere to run." The room began to distort, the walls twisting, bending, as if they were alive with a power beyond understanding. The air crackled with electricity, as if reality itself were warping under the weight of something ancient and unstoppable. The very essence of the space seemed to come alive, to contract and expand with the force of something far greater than Karen could comprehend. She staggered back, her breath coming in short gasps, her pulse pounding in her ears. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the suffocating feeling in her chest told her otherwise. And then, in the corner of the room, she saw it. A hand. It emerged from the shadows like a claw, long and twisted, reaching toward her. It was black, like the darkness itself had taken shape, and the fingers were tipped with long, sharp nails that gleamed in the faint, eerie light. The hand reached toward her with slow, deliberate movements, as if it were savoring the moment. Karen froze, her blood running cold as the hand drew closer. "You can't escape." The voice was louder now, all around her, filling her head with its oppressive weight. The hand was inches away from her, and she could feel its coldness in her bones. And then a voice broke through the darkness. Tom's voice. "Karen, get out of there." Her heart leapt, and she spun around, her eyes frantically searching for him. She could see him now, standing in the doorway, his face a mask of fear. "Karen, come on, you have to leave. It's not real. It's a trap." But the hand was still reaching for her, its fingers curling like a claw. It was as if time had slowed down, stretching each moment until it felt like an eternity. Karen's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. No, this was real. This was happening. "Karen!" Tom shouted again, his voice breaking to the fog of fear, clouding her mind. Without thinking, Karen dashed toward him, her legs carrying her faster than she thought possible. She felt the cold hand brush against her skin, its icy touch sending a jolt of terror through her. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. With one final burst of energy, she reached Tom, her fingers gripping his arm tightly. He looked at her with wide eyes, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Let's go, Karen. Let's get out of here. Now!" They didn't stop running. The house, or whatever it had become, seemed to stretch endlessly behind them, the shadows still chasing them. The feeling of being watched never left her, the presence that haunted the edges of her perception still pressing in on her, whispering things she couldn't understand. The world around her twisted and warped, the edges of reality folding in on themselves like the pages of a book being torn apart. They didn't stop. They couldn't. But the further they ran, the more it felt like the world was closing in, trapping them, suffocating them. The air grew thicker, and the whispers grew louder. The sound of something following them grew nearer. You could not escape. Episode 9, The Rift. The air was thick. a heavy silence hanging over Hollow Creek as Karen and Tom made their way through the fog, each step echoing against the eerie quiet of the abandoned streets. The town felt like it was held together by fragile threads, a place suspended between worlds. Shadows curled around the corners of buildings, and the once familiar paths they walked now felt alien and oppressive. It was as if the town had become a living thing, alive with the restless energy of whatever force was trying to break through. Karen could feel it. The same weight that had pressed down on her the moment she stepped into Mira's reflection was now here, suffocating her with every breath. She could feel the rift, the rupture between the realms. The space between life and death, light and shadow, was no longer just something distant. It was here. It was now. It was pulling at her with an intensity she couldn't deny. "You've crossed over, Karen." The Watcher's voice echoed in her mind once again, as it had so many times before. "The veil is weakening. You are the key, and the gate is open." Tom's voice broke through her thoughts, shaky and desperate, but there was a strength in it now. "Karen, we need to keep moving. We have to find a way out of this." She looked at him, his face pale and lined with exhaustion. He had been with her through everything, the storm, the mirror, the horrors they had both witnessed. But this was different. There was something in his eyes now, something she hadn't seen before. Fear. Real, tangible fear. "I know," she said, her voice strained, "but it's like we're running in circles. Every time we try to leave the rift, it pulls us back." They turned a corner and stopped dead in their tracks. In front of them stood the old church at the center of town. The once grand building was now a hollow shell, its broken windows like empty eyes staring out into fog. It had been a place of refuge once, a sanctuary where people had gathered in times of joy and sorrow. But now, it looked like a tomb, its door hanging ajar, inviting them in with an ominous promise. Karen felt her pulse quicken. She didn't want to go in. Not again. But the pull, the strange magnetic force, was too strong. It was as though the rift had drawn them here, to the very heart of Hollow Creek. Tom took a step back, shaking his head. "We can't go in there, Karen. I've seen what's inside. I've seen what it does to people." Karen felt the cold chill wrap around her like a vice. She knew what he meant. She had seen it too. The twisted shapes, the shadows that danced just beyond the light, the whispering voices that had driven people to madness. But it wasn't just the church. It was everywhere now. The rift had torn the fabric of reality apart, and what lay beyond it was slowly seeping through, infecting everything in its path. She swallowed hard, her throat dry as dust. "We have no choice, Tom. We have to go in. It's the only way." Reluctantly, Tom nodded, his jaw tight, his hand trembling as he reached for the door. The moment it creaked open, a wave of cold air hit them both, like a breath from the grave. Inside, the church was dark, the air thick with the scent of decay and something worse, something that clung to the walls like an unspoken fear. Karen stepped inside first, her footsteps echoing through the hollow building. The beams of light that filtered through the broken windows barely illuminated the pews, now covered in dust and cobwebs. But it wasn't the broken architecture that caught her attention. It was the center of the room. There, in the center of the altar, stood a strange, dark shape. At first, it looked like a shadow, a darkened silhouette standing tall and motionless. But as Karen drew closer, she realized it was not a shadow at all. It was a figure, a human figure, or something that resembled one. The figure was tall, its limbs elongated, its form shrouded in tattered black cloth, like a cloak or a robe. Its face was hidden, obscured by the hood that draped over its head, but Karen could feel its gaze. She could feel it watching her. "Karen, don't get closer," Tom whispered, his voice barely audible. But it was too late. Karen was already moving toward the figure, drawn to it by a force stronger than her will. As she got closer, she could feel the air grow colder, the temperature dropping to an unbearable chill. She stopped just a few feet from the figure, feeling the weight of its presence pressing down on her. "It's not real. It's not real." The thought echoed in her mind, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this figure, this thing, was the source of the darkness that had taken hold of Hollow Creek. The figure slowly raised its hand, and for the first time, Karen saw its eyes. if they could be called eyes. They were black, void-like, with no discernible iris or pupil. Just an endless abyss that seemed to suck the light from the air. The figure spoke, but its voice was not one Karen had expected. It wasn't the deep, guttural voice of the Watcher. No, this voice was soft, like a whisper, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 years. You are the one who opened the gate. The word sent a chill through Karen's body. Her knees buckled beneath her, but she forced herself to stay standing. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What is this place?" The figure's head tilted slightly, and for a brief moment, Karen thought she saw the faintest trace of a smile beneath the hood, but it was gone before she could be sure. This place is where it begins. This is where the veil ends. You will witness what lies beyond. You are the one who will lead them through. Karen felt her stomach drop. "No, I won't lead anyone anywhere." The figure's smile widened, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent hunger. "Too late, Karen. The rift is already open, and now you must choose. The door between worlds is open, and you will decide what happens next. Will you close it, or will you let it consume all?" Episode 10, The Last Watch. The rift was wider now. Karen could feel it in her bones, in the very air around her. It hummed with a dark energy, a presence that stretched across the boundaries of her perception. The figure, the creature cloaked in shadows, stood before her, its eyes deep, endless pits that seemed to swallow the light around them. Its form towered over her, its voice soft but carrying the weight of ages. "You have opened the gate, Karen." The voice echoed in her mind, filling every corner of her thoughts. And now there is no turning back. Karen's heart raced. The weight of what the figure had said crushed her chest like a vice. She could feel it. The rift, the doorway between worlds, was collapsing, pulling them into a space where the laws of time and reality no longer applied. This was it. This was the moment she had been dreading. The moment she realized that the darkness wasn't just going to pass. It was going to stay. It was going to consume everything. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. The figure extended a hand, its long fingers outstretched, the blackness around it swirling in a dance of unnatural motion. "Come," it whispered, the word like a command that resonated deep within her soul. "It is time for you to witness what lies beyond the veil." Karen's breath caught in her throat. She could feel herself being drawn in, pulled forward toward the hand, toward the dark power that beckoned her. The shadows seemed to breathe, to move with a purpose. Each step she took toward the figure, bringing her closer to the center of the rift. The lines between the world she knew and the one beyond were blurring, fading like smoke in the wind. But Tom's voice broke through the haze, sharp and desperate. "Karen!" He had been standing just behind her, but his voice sounded distant now, as though he were being swallowed by the same force that had taken hold of her. "Karen, don't go near it. You don't know what it will do to you." Her head snapped around, her eyes searching for him in the growing darkness. But he was no longer in the same room. The space around her had shifted again, twisting and warping like a living entity. The walls of the church, if that's what it had been, had dissolved, and now there was only an infinite expanse of swirling dark mist, stretching into an abyss. Tom's voice echoed, but he was nowhere to be seen. "Karen!" She turned back to the figure, her pulse quickening. This was it, the moment of decision. The darkness had already begun to take root in the world, and now it was waiting for her to make the choice that would determine everything. "What will you do, Karen?" The figure's voice dripped with anticipation. "Will you step through the veil and embrace the inevitable, or will you fight? And in doing so, condemn yourself to the horrors that lie beyond?" Karen's mind raced. There had to be a way to fight back. There had to be a way to close the rift, to stop the creatures on the other side from breaking through. She thought of the mirror, of the symbol etched into the church, of the warning from the stranger. They had all been pieces of the puzzle, but now it felt like the answer was just out of reach, like it was slipping through her fingers. Fight or embrace? She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. The shadows pressed in, filling her lungs, tightening around her chest. The choice was hers. But the weight of the decision was too much to bear. She couldn't do it alone. "Tom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Where are you?" In that instant, something shifted. The shadows seemed to pull back, as though retreating from the question. Karen felt a flicker of hope in her chest. She wasn't alone. She couldn't be. She couldn't face this alone. The figure seemed to sense it too. It recoiled, its dark presence flickering like a candle being snuffed out. For a moment, Karen thought it might disappear, that it might leave her to make her choice in peace. But then, the shadows around her rippled. Suddenly, the mist began to coalesce into something solid, something real. The world around her flickered. Once again, the boundaries between worlds seemed to twist and tear. The ground beneath her feet cracked open like a deep chasm, revealing the endless black void beneath. And there, at the edge of the rift, standing at the threshold between the living and the dead, was a figure, a woman, tall, with wild hair and eyes that glinted like cold metal. Her presence was unmistakable, like an old friend whose name Karen had forgotten. It was a woman who had warned her, the one who had spoken the darkness, who had tried to stop her from crossing the threshold. But now, she wasn't here to warn. She was here to guide. The woman's eyes locked with Karen's, and in them, Karen saw an understanding, a recognition that transcended time. "You are not alone," the woman said, her voice calm, despite the storm raging around them. "And you will not face this fate by yourself. There's a way to close the rift, to stop the darkness. But it will require more than just your will. It will require sacrifice." The world around them shuddered, the very fabric of reality tearing at the seams. The woman moved toward Karen, her eyes never leaving hers, and Karen could feel the power within her. It was ancient, primal, and full of sorrow. "The cost will be great," the woman continued, "but you must choose. You must close the rift or let the darkness consume all." Karen could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, suffocating her. Every part of her wanted to run, to escape this fate that seemed inevitable. But deep inside, she knew that there was no turning back. The choice was hers, and hers alone. "Do you understand what this means?" the woman asked softly. Karen nodded, her heart in her throat. She understood. The rift was not just a crack in the fabric of reality. It was a wound that would keep bleeding unless it was sealed, unless the darkness was pushed back where it belonged. "I understand," Karen said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'll do it. I'll close the rift." The woman nodded solemnly. "Then you must walk the path of sacrifice. Only through that can the veil be restored and the darkness held at bay." Karen's body shook with the enormity of the decision, but her resolve was unwavering. She had to do this. She had to protect the world. She had to protect Tom and everyone she loved. And so, as the shadows closed in once more, Karen stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next.